An army of 10,000 marched formidably through the valley, their grand banner embroidered with a golden dragon fluttering proudly in the wind. Clad in sturdy black armor trimmed with gold, the warriors clutched their long spears, their eyes blazing with fierce resolve. The entire host halted before a stone staircase carpeted in green, which ascended to the towering and majestic palace. Upon the windswept summit, a man sat cross-legged on a wooden chair, exuding the overwhelming aura of a sovereign ruler. He flashed a haughty sir, baring his sharp teeth in a defiant challenge. What a magnificent sight! Behind him, a black-cloaked subordinate bowed in deep reverence and shouted, "We swear loyalty unto death. Under the guidance of our cult leader, the might of our cult shakes the very heavens. Now, the central plains shall grovel at your feet." Heavenly demon Wei Qian smirked smugly, his eyes burning red with the fires of war indeed. That is only natural. However, cult leader, this subordinate has a question. Speak. The subordinate pointed forward timidly, breaking into a cold sweat of fear regarding those highly expensive armaments. Exquisite armor and weapons crafted from rare metals, the likes of which only the greatest sects possess. Our cult's treasury has long been depleted. Where on earth did you manage to procure such astronomical funds? The cult leader calmly raised his cup of hot tea and replied nonchalantly, "Someone lent it to use." The subordinate's eyes widened, his face pale with utter shock. "What did you say?" "Someone took the initiative to offer us a loan." Utterly bewildered, the subordinate thought to himself, lending money to the demonic cult. No sane person would do that. We will obviously just take the gold and never pay it back. Suddenly, his pupils dilated as a realization struck him, which means there is only one logical explanation. Clasping his hands together firmly, he bowed in profound reverence and awe. As expected of the heavenly demon, that fool must have been cowed by your supreme martial arts and majestic bearing. The banking houses across the central plains have been utterly struck with terror. Clasping his hands, the left envoy exclaimed with a radiant face, and they voluntarily surrendered their treasury as tribute. Bleeding the enemy dry without shedding a single drop of blood. I am truly in awe. But in the very next instant, cold sweat broke across his brow, as he wondered what kind of madman would hand over gold directly into our clutches. Sitting leisurely upon his throne overlooking the mountain peaks, the cult leader spoke with lofty elegance. "I am no mere ruffian. Did you truly think I went there simply to extort them?" With that, he reached inside his thick, heavy furrows, searching for something. The cult leader drew forth a piece of paper and looked at the left envoy. "All I had to do was press my thumbprint here, and they instantly transferred the gold." He held up the paper. He claimed his name was Manager Kim. A most agreeable fellow. He even promised a remarkably low interest rate. Receiving the paper, sweat poured down the left envoy's face. A contract. They dared to lend an entire fortune based solely on this scrap of paper. The left envoy's eyes locked onto the glaring crimson text framed in the bottom corner, the special terms and conditions. His pupils contracted in sheer horror as he read the following line. The contract stated a terrifying clause in plain ink: in the event of default, the borrower's internal energy shall be seized. The subordinate trembled violently. "In the event of default, they will seize your internal energy. And the due date for payment is today." The cult leader pursed his lips slightly, a single drop of cold sweat rolling down his cheek in the face of this harsh reality. The left envoy hurriedly smoothed things over. "What an arrogant contract. This is clearly nothing more than a mere formality. Cult leader, does not all the gold and silver under heaven already belong to you anyway?" He offered a confident smile of reassurance. "Thus, even if the due date is today, it matters not at all." Stroking his beard in satisfaction, the cult leader tucked the paper back into his breast robes. "The left envoy has a keen eye." "Exactly. Once victorious, we need only bestow a fraction of the gold back to this Manager Kim, and that will be the end of it." The left envoy immediately clasped his hands in adulation. "Truly worthy of being the very sky of the central plains. Such is the majestic grandeur of the heavenly demon." Filled with pride, the cult leader threw back his head and laughed heartily. Placing his hand upon the hilt, he decisively unsheathed his treasured sword, its steel gleaming with a brilliant light. Drawing himself up to his full height, he raised the blade high toward the heavens in majestic defiance indeed. The tip of his blade pointed straight at the vault of clouds, asserting his supreme domain. "For I am heaven itself. Pillage and burn everything. From this day forth, we are the absolute rulers of the central plains." He brandished his sword forward, his cloak billowing in the wind. "Go." The subordinate's hand struck his chest in a sharp, decisive salute. The soldiers roared in unison, their voices echoing by your command. The leader sheathed his sword as the legion prepared to march, kicking up a blinding cloud of dust. Iron-helmeted soldiers roared with wide-open mouths, charging into battle in a wild frenzy. Deafening war cries erupted from the fierce faces surging forward. 10,000 soldiers stood in formation, an endless sea of humanity stretching before their commander. Ironclad feet trampled the earth, beginning their swift, forced march. The army, swarming like ants, poured into the valley, their banners blotting out the sky. Clad in his fur coat, he stood towering on the high platform, gazing upon the realm with utter self-satisfaction. He smirked in supreme contempt, scoffing with ultimate arrogance. Leisurely, he sat down on his wooden chair, preparing to enjoy a cup of hot tea. He took a slow, elegant sip. Closing his eyes, he exhaled in deep satisfaction, savoring the aroma of the tea. Leaning back with his legs crossed, he indulged in the moment. Yes. This is how it should be. Welcome, esteemed guest. An unexpected voice rang out, startling him into spitting out his tea. Who's there? He leaped to his feet, eyes wide with astonishment as he stared at the two uninvited guests standing right behind him. Ho! The young man offered a bright, friendly smile. Beside him stood a beautiful girl with emerald green eyes, gazing impassively at the leader. Two mysterious figures materialized with majestic grace, a man shrouded in pitch-black robes and a young maiden clad in ancient, traditional attire. That man. Is he the one who lent me the money? But wait. Did he just approach me from behind without my knowing? Wei Jichun stood frozen in the courtyard, cold sweat trickling down his neck. His opponent had closed the distance, yet he had felt absolutely nothing. The heavenly demon, Wei Jichun, a peerless master vying for the title of the world's strongest. His senses were so razor-sharp that not even the fall of a single leaf atop 100,000 mountains could escape him. My apologies for startling you. EM Manager Kim, representing the Continental Bank. We met briefly last time when we finalized the loan paperwork, did we not? Gazing at the man's smile, Wei Jichun thought to himself that it was indeed the most courteous of greetings. Yet, his instincts as a supreme master screamed in warning. This man was incredibly dangerous. The atmosphere grew heavy and suffocating as an overwhelming sense of dread enveloped the area. Just who are you? Manager Kim chuckled heartily, rummaging through his coat pocket. I believe I just told you. EM Manager Kim. He produced a brown leather-bound ledger. My dear client. Surely you are well aware that today is the maturity date of your loan. The young maiden beside him adjusted her glasses with professional grace. She stood poised and solemn, holding a ledger in one hand, and a wooden abacus in the other, ready for action. Her fingers flew across the frame, deftly sliding the wooden beads with masterful precision. Each bead clicked into place with absolute finality, sealing the ultimate sum. Lowering her glasses slightly, she peered at her records with utmost gravity. The female assistant leaned in to whisper her report to Manager Kim. He nodded in understanding, while the heavenly demon stood to the side, breaking into a cold sweat of sheer bewilderment. Manager Kim offered a warm yet terrifying smile. My dear customer. A principal of 6,000 taels, plus 7,000 taels in interest. That makes a grand total of 13,000 taels. The heavenly demon's eyes widened in sheer horror at the unfathomable sum. Why in the heavens is the interest so outrageously high? The heavenly demon roared in fury. How can the interest possibly exceed the principal itself? Manager Kim let out a mocking chuckle. Now, sir. Did you truly expect a loan shark to offer a bargain? The heavenly demon clenched his fists, veins bulging. What did you just say? Manager Kim's expression darkened, his gaze turning ice cold. If you wanted low interest rates, you should have frequented a legitimate establishment. Why did you summon us instead? Your credit score is in the gutter. You possess zero collateral. And your occupation is the leader of a violent syndicate. You knew full well you could never pass the screening of a reputable bank. Seething with rage, thick veins popped on the heavenly demon's forehead. A violent syndicate. My sect is a sacred, mobile cult. Manager Kim sneered. To the outside world, you are nothing but a pack of demonic cult thugs. You are classified as a high-risk demographic, liable to be annihilated at any moment. Who in their right mind would dare lend you coin? It is only because your partner is us that you were granted a loan at all. The heavenly demon stood speechless, cold sweat pouring down his face as he found himself utterly unable to refute a single word. In truth, a bank in the Central Plains discovered doing business with a demonic cult would be instantly forced to shut down by the orthodox sects. A slender finger tapped gently upon the contract, breaking the heavy silence. The female assistant presented the contract, pointing to a signed clause. The interest rate already includes the hazard insurance premium. You signed here yourself, right here under Article 4, Clause 2. The heavenly demon suffered in silence, his teeth grinding together in sheer helplessness and fury. With a long, heavy sigh, the heavenly demon let his shoulders slump, resigned to the grim reality. Listen to me, shopkeeper Kim. It is as you say, I do not have the ready coin on me right now. I admit that much. However, the heavenly demon suddenly pointed toward the far horizon, reclaiming his confident air. Look out there. He proudly gestured to the vast, sprawling lands that lay below the mountain peak. Do you see those fertile lands of the Central Plains stretching out before you? I see them clearly, Manager Kim replied, though the fog is rather thick. The heavenly demon cut him off. Forget the fog. I am going down there right now to conquer it all. Merely plundering the treasury of the Martial Alliance will make your measly 13,000 taels look like spare change. Sweating, the heavenly demon bargained. Give me exactly 1 month. Just wait a single month. I shall not short you a single copper of interest. Puffing out his chest to reclaim his dignity, he declared, "I will pay back double the principal. No, triple. I swear it on the name of the heavenly demon. An investment yielding triple the returns should the conquest of the Central Plains succeed." The heavenly demon stood with his back to them, gazing out at the mountain, while his two guests watched him in silence from behind. Manager Kim smirked knowingly at this lucrative yet high-risk proposal, letting out a soft sigh. And yet, Manager Kim offered a polite smile, though his eyes remained razor-sharp. "Valued customer, we do not invest in uncertain futures. We look only at your present ability to pay." Cold sweat beaded on the heavenly demon's brow in sheer shock. Manager Kim pressed on relentlessly. "As for this conquest, are you aware that statistical models put your rate of success at under 5%? The risk factor is far too high." Heavy footsteps rang out against the stone floor as Manager Kim closed the distance to his debtor. Exerting a suffocating pressure with every stride, Manager Kim advanced on the heavenly demon. "Your proposal is rejected. The grace period of our agreement has officially expired." Manager Kim's smile suddenly turned dark and menacing. "Since you have no coin, then as per the contract." The protagonist's eyes flashed with a murderous crimson as he leaned in threateningly. "You will simply have to pay with your body, dear customer." The heavenly demon's face darkened in horror at the chilling declaration. Unleashing a surge of murderous intent, the heavenly demon roared in fury. "You dare demand the body of the heavenly demon?" The dragon-embroidered banners of the demonic cult whipped violently in the fierce wind sweeping across the mountain peak. The female assistant shielded her face as the gale whipped her hair, taken aback by the sudden, crushing pressure. Her expression turned grave as she felt a monstrous surge of inner energy roiling violently all around them. The sky above the peak trembled violently, and dark clouds swirled to herald an impending storm. Darkness fell as the earth shuddered beneath the invisible pressure of the heavenly demon's wrath. In awe, the female assistant watched as a terrifying, cataclysmic power stood poised to erupt. A terrifying power cracked the earth, sending shattered stone flying in all directions beneath the cult leader's feet. The heavenly demon stood imposing, his eyes burning bright, his fur cloak billowing wildly in the swelling tide of his oppressive aura. With a decisive sweep, he drew his divine blade, unleashing a shockwave that crumbled the stone foundation. Yet Manager Kim continued to watch nonchalantly from behind. "I am the heavenly demon, the absolute zenith of the demonic path. How dare a lowly, mortal loan shark harbor designs against me? I originally intended to show mercy by granting you only gold and silver, but you have brought this doom upon yourself." A colossal torrent of deep purple dark energy erupted, blotting out the heavens before the eyes of the creditor and his assistant. Nearby, Manager Kim trembled, his face pale with horror before the oppressive tide of killing intent. Sweat poured from him like rain as he bore witness to the absolute wrath of the cult leader. Turning back with a malevolent smirk, the heavenly demon sneered. "What is the matter? Have you grown afraid? But it is far too late. Even if you beg for mercy now, your fate will not change." Manager Kim sighed. "Good heavens. How could you waste your energy so recklessly? That is all confiscated collateral." The heavenly demon blinked in utter bewilderment, completely unable to comprehend the young man's bizarre reaction. "How dare you destroy collateral without the creditor's consent? Good grief, this is truly heartbreaking." As Manager Kim watched the dispersing energy with genuine anguish, the heavenly demon shook with rage, veins bulging as he tightened his grip on the sword's hilt. Losing all control, he lunged toward him, roaring, "Illuminate." The heavenly demon unleashed a blinding vertical slash, but Manager Kim lightly slipped past it by a hair's breadth. Whoops! The devastating strike tore path, plowing deep into the earth and carving a long trench. "Be ground into dust like the garbage you are, and perish." Swinging his blade, the heavenly demon unleashed his ultimate technique, the Dark Eye Annihilation Slash, tearing through the fabric of space itself. The sword key crashed violently against the earth, igniting a blinding explosion that shook the entire valley. Manager Kim effortlessly swayed, letting the colossal wave of sword kai brush harmlessly past him. The young manager smirked knowingly, his hands blurring into after images with a swift, supple motion. The devastating wave of sword kai was effortlessly deflected, carving a deep, jagged trench into the earth nearby. In the distance, the stray sword key severed the peak of a snow-capped mountain, sending it sliding down in a terrifying avalanche. The female assistant gaped in sheer disbelief at the earth-shattering spectacle unfolding before her eyes. To think a mere deflected wave of sword key could slice a mountain in two. The cult leader of the demonic sect let out a low, smug chuckle. I wondered where you got such arrogance from. It seems you do possess some genuine skill. But those petty parlor tricks will only hasten your demise." Tightening his grip on his divine blade, he watched as a thick, dark purple demonic energy surged violently up his arm. The heavenly demon pushed his inner energy to its absolute limit, unleashing his full demonic power as the ground beneath his feet cracked and trembled violently. "Now, try and withstand this. You will soon realize how utterly pathetic your petty tricks are." Amidst his grandiose posturing, he had no idea when on earth Manager Kim had already placed a hand on his body. "You truly are a talkative customer." The heavenly demon's arrogant face froze, and beads of sweat poured down as he realized his opponent had closed in on him undetected. Helplessly, he looked down at the hand resting upon his stomach. A truth that no one in the Central Plains would ever dare believe. What? The heavenly demon Wei Jiqian, the peerless master under heaven, had just had his dantian shattered by a mere nobody. Could I not even track his movements? Manager Kim sneered coldly. Ow, let us begin the harvest. He looked up at the debtor one last time to give a warning. This might hurt a little. A brilliant golden light erupted violently, enveloping them both, as the extraction of internal energy officially began. The heavenly demon screamed in agony, feeling as though his vital organs were being torn to shreds. His eyes widened in sheer horror. Is this the great Kai-absorbing art? Impossible, my internal energy is being completely sucked dry. The massive torrent of demonic Kai being extracted formed a swirling energy storm in midair, accompanied by the excruciating screams of the defeated foe. Manager Kim maintained the polite smile of a bank teller. Dear customer, please relax your body. At this rate, you might suffer from Kai deviation. Mashing his teeth in pure hatred, the heavenly demon roared, You bastard! Do you have any idea how much agonizing effort it took for me to accumulate this much internal energy? Manager Kim cheerfully suggested, Let me tell you what, I shall be exceptionally generous. Manager Kim's face suddenly turned incredibly terrifying as he whispered, I will also help you completely drain all the turbid Kai accumulated in your body as well. The heavenly demon was completely dumbfounded, tears and mucus streaming down his face, utterly shell-shocked by the sheer cruelty of his creditor. The agonizing wails of the realm's greatest master echoed across the skies of the demonic cult, shaking the entire dynasty. The heavenly demon's legs lost all strength, and he collapsed onto his knees upon the cracked stone floor. The man who once ruled the martial world was now utterly depleted, prostrate on the ground like a lost soul. He could only mutter incoherent words in absolute helplessness. Manager Kim bowed politely, You have worked hard, dear customer. That collection is complete. Smiling brightly, Manager Kim introduced himself as a representative of the mainland bank, alongside his assistant, Mikla Ho, who stood timidly by his side. He bowed in farewell with a radiant smile. Please continue to use our services in the future. The heavenly demon stared tremblingly at the business card in his hand, listening to his creditor's disingenuous declaration, We love you, our esteemed customer. He glared at the retreating back of the creditor, hissing bitterly. Wei Jiqian lay sprawled on the cracked turf, spitting out in sheer venom. You wretch. Bastard. A calling card fluttered down from above, landing right beside the hollow, dazed face of the demonic cult leader. Inscribed clearly upon the card were the words Treasurer Kim of the Continental Bank. Beneath a sapphire sky, yellow lanterns swayed gently in the wind outside an ancient tavern. Inside Sichuan's return guest pavilion, the tavern was packed to the brim with patrons, the air buzzing with lively chatter. The tables were laden with delectable side dishes and jars of fragrant bamboo wine. Lifting his wine cup, a man eagerly raised his voice. Hey, have you heard the rumors yet? Leaning close to his companion's ear, he whispered conspiratorially about those demonic cult bastards. Word has it they've completely halted their march. What? Truly? No way in hell. 3 days have passed, and they haven't nudged a single step from the gates of Sichuan. Are you suggesting that the great Lord Wei Jiqian has felt the sting of fear? Preposterous. Who do you think Wei Jiqian is? Memories of that harrowing battle resurfaced over a decade ago. He single-handedly slaughtered 100 masters of the righteous sects. Is he not a monster among monsters? A fierce debate erupted. Some claimed it was a trap, while others speculated that the heavenly demon was on the verge of breakthrough and ascension. Yet, such a theory was instantly dismissed. It was far too absurd to occur in the dead center of a battlefield. The sheer momentum of the demonic cult's grand army was powerful enough to swallow the Central Plains in a single breath. For them to halt so suddenly was utterly incomprehensible. Even before the imperial army or the 9 great sects could form an alliance to obstruct them, this formidable host of the demonic cult had ground to a halt. Could it be that he has fallen victim to Kai deviation? Well, I think. Come on, that's impossible. Every soul conjured up grand explanations, utterly convinced that some profound conspiracy or miraculous encounter was about to be etched into the annals of the Jianghu. Amidst the cacophony of voices, a man raised his cup and muttered, Or could it be? Resting his chin on his hand with a wry smile, he offered a painfully pragmatic reason. Is it possible they have simply run out of travel funds? It must require an astronomical fortune to mobilize an army of that scale. The tavern bustled with life as the patrons continued their animated chatter. Another patron burst into roaring laughter, mocking him. Hey, you fool. Do you honestly think the great demonic cult would halt their war over a mere lack of coin? That's the funniest joke of the year. Have you not heard that the cult sits upon mountains of gold, silver, and priceless jewels? The man opposite him sheepishly defended himself. I was just saying. Even we face hardships when we're broke. His companion dismissed him with sheer disdain. That is only true for peasants like us. The mockery continued. The great heavenly demon, halting his march over money. You might as well claim he saw a carp in the Yellow River, wept tears of mercy. and banned all killing. Tucked away in a corner table, two peculiar guests listened in silence. Manager Kim curled his lips into a knowing smirk at their naive chatter. Folding his arms, Manager Kim smiled triumphantly. Well, that fellow isn't entirely wrong, is he? Mo Lisu rested her chin on her hand, agreeing true, isn't he? Fluttering her eyelashes seductively, she marveled who would have thought he'd understand that whether one is a mere mortal, a demon, or the demonic cult leader himself, none are immune to the absolute power of money. The waiter quickly placed the menu on their table, greeting them warmly. Are you ready to order, honored guests? Our ingredients today are exceptionally fresh. Li Hua coaxed playfully. Manager, didn't you promise to treat me to a proper feast this time? My stomach is practically sticking to my spine after that arduous journey all the way to the 100,000 mountains. Manager Kim called out with a stern face. Miss Mo. Yes. His face darkened with gravity. The expense account is not your personal piggy bank. This time, we received internal energy, not money. His gaze turned razor sharp, which means that currently, we are operating at a loss. Turning to the waiter, he flashed a bright smile. So, give us 2 bowls of the cheapest noodles here. Li Hua cried out in despair. Come on, manager. 2 bowls of plain noodles were quickly served. Here are your 2 cheapest bowls of noodles, valued guests. Li Hua grumbled as she ate. You cheapskate. I curse you to go bald. Manager Kim calmly slurped his noodles. Frugality has nothing to do with hair loss. Swallowing her anger along with the noodles, she asked inquisitively, where is the next fool we're going to meet? Setting down his chopsticks, Manager Kim warned in a stern voice, watch your tongue, Miss Mo. They are not fools, they are clients. Li Hua nodded. Yes, so where does this esteemed client live? A subtle and dangerous smile crept onto the lips of the pragmatic bank manager. His eyes flashed with a cold, sharp light as he softly uttered their next destination, Manhwa. Under the luminous moonlight, the rolling ranges of Huan County rose majestically above the brightly lit town. This was the territory of the continent's #1 sect. The streets bustled in the night, crowds of people thronging under the warm glow of lanterns. The polished black leather shoe stepped resolutely onto the dark ground. Manager Kim spoke to his assistant, who was dressed in an alluring high-slit dress. All right, we have arrived. He pointed toward a dilapidated wooden cabin hidden deep in the forest. This is our precious workplace for today. Out of the abandoned cabin, 2 guarding figures suddenly emerged and commanded, halt. The sinister, scarred guard sneered, no unauthorized entry. Why are a fine young man and woman wandering into such a remote place in the dead of night? Li Hua thought to herself in surprise, guards. At a shabby shack like this. She looked around at the desolate wilderness shrouded in darkness, wondering where on earth they were. Manager Kim smiled amiably. We have business inside. May we enter? The guard brushed him off. Not just anyone can enter as they please. Show me your transit token. Manager Kim narrowed his eyes, offering a knowing, nonchalant smile. I don't have one. I don't have anything of the sort. The guard's face twitched with rage. The guard drew his sword, the sharp blade gleaming with a cold light in the darkness. He glared menacingly, threatening, get lost if you know what's good for you, while we're still merciful enough to let you leave in one piece before blood is spilled. The protagonist sighed, completely unfazed by the threat. He leisurely stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, and remarked, you look like someone who has taken a few lives. Is that correct? Manager Kim's face darkened, his eyes flashing with coldness. This won't do. You people need to be taught a lesson. The guard screamed in fury. You really are a fool who won't shed tears until you see your own coffin. Brandishing his sword, he charged forward. He leaped high into the air, descending with a sword strike thick with murderous intent. Manager Kim stood completely still, gently raising his hand with an air of absolute confidence and composure. Without a single wasted motion, the man's arm was snapped instantly. Staring in horror at his deformed limb, a wave of agonizing pain surged through him. The arm had been twisted violently backward. His guttural scream instantly shattered the silence. The neighboring soldier broke into a cold sweat, unable to believe his eyes at his opponent's terrifying composure. Roaring in fury, he charged forward in a frenzied assault, crying out, you bastard. He unleashed a deadly, insidious strike from the venomous serpent sword blade. The venomous fang flash. Manager Kim caught the razor-sharp blade between 2 fingers with absolute ease. The blade snapped in half under the sheer force of his fingers, shards scattering through the air. The soldier gaped in utter shock, unable to comprehend how his sword had been shattered so effortlessly. In a flash, the protagonist glided past, leaving his foe standing frozen in shock. Beams of azure energy shot forth in rapid succession, striking the major acupoints along the guard's back. He shrieked in agony as his vital acupoints were struck. He collapsed to the ground, white smoke rising from the struck acupoints, while Manager Kim walked away with nonchalance. Mo Li Hua watched from a distance, her expression pensive and deep in thought. No matter how closely I watch, I still cannot see through him. I have witnessed countless martial styles within my own clan. Yet the martial arts this manager employs do not belong to the orthodox path. nor do they belong to the unorthodox. Furthermore, not long ago, even when charging alone into the demonic cult to suppress the heavenly demon, he showed not a single shred of fear or hesitation. Such a supreme master must surely be renowned throughout the martial world. There is no way I wouldn't know of his name. Mo Lihua furrowed her brows, doubts swirling in her heart regarding her enigmatic superior. Just what is Manager Kim's true identity? Should I just ask him directly? Lihua's eyes wavered as she pondered, but she hesitated, cowed by his stern demeanor. Letting out a soft sigh, she thought to herself, even if I ask, he probably won't answer. After all, he has never shared anything with me. Ahead, Manager Kim maintained his icy expression, walking forward without a backward glance. On the ground, the guard writhed in agony, clutching his shattered arm and wailing miserably. Eard. Sharp burst of energy, like invisible blades, hurtled toward him, leaving him to do nothing but gape and scream in despair. Both guards lay sprawled on the ground, stripped of any power to resist in the face of the protagonist's overwhelming might. Lihua looked down at the motionless guard in curiosity. Is he dead? Manager Kim replied indifferently, I merely severed his tendons. He will never harm innocent people again. She gasped in awe. Walking ahead, he commanded, Ismo, clean them up, stack them in the corner, and then follow me. Lihua pointed to herself in a panic. You want me to do that? Yes. It would be troublesome if someone saw them. Grumbling with resentment, Lihua dragged the heavy body into a dark corner, muttering curses under her breath. Cruel boss. Bald manager. Meanwhile, he had already leisurely pushed open the door and stepped inside the hut. Manager Kim stood tall at the entrance, his piercing gaze swiftly sweeping across the gloomy depths of the abandoned house. Raising an eyebrow in quiet intrigue, he detected an anomaly beneath the floorboards. Within this derelict shack lay a secret that no soul could have ever anticipated. Right in the center of the wooden floor, a yawning staircase plunged straight down into the depths of a hidden basement. Solitary footsteps echoed rhythmically against the damp steps as Manager Kim leisurely descended into the mysterious depths. The deeper he ventured, the louder the clamor grew, and a faint, amused smile played on his lips as the murmuring of voices drifted up to meet him. He let out a soft gasp of surprise upon witnessing the spectacle before him. Hidden beneath the darkness was a colossal, bustling gambling den, its dozens of tables packed to capacity, alive with the relentless clatter of tiles. Desperate gamblers locked horns in fierce wagers, the ceaseless clinking of gold coins and tiles weaving a tapestry of sheer chaos. A burly, fierce-looking man slammed a bowl onto the table and roared with supreme confidence, this time it is definitely even. I'll wager my very wrist on this round. Another loud crash shook a table as a bearded brute roared in fury at his companion. You stubborn fool. Playing like that, when will you ever make any money? Damn it all. Ho stepped through the entrance, the high slit of her flowing robe drawing every eye. Manager, she called. He turned his head, smiling gently. Miss Matt, you have arrived. Crossing his arms, he grumbled nonchalantly, make haste. You are always so sluggish. She bowed in vexation. Before you say that, wouldn't it be better if you lent me a hand with the packing? Ho gazed around the grand hall in bewilderment, whispering to her superior, but isn't this place a gambling den? Is this where we are to work this time? Manager Kim closed his eyes slightly, a knowing smile gracing his lips as he answered curtly, and with absolute confidence precisely. Grimacing, Ho covered her nose to block out the suffocating air of, what is wrong with the atmosphere in here? I am about to suffocate. He chuckled in delight. The scent of coin is always a little foul. Suddenly, a burst of ecstatic cheering erupted from a large table ahead, drawing both of their startled gazes. The crowd showered endless praise upon the youth dominating the betting table heavens. He won again. Isn't that 3 times in a row? This lad is phenomenal. Manager Kim narrowed his eyes toward the center of the parlor, a smug smile spreading across his face as he whispered to Ho, there he is. Our client. Slender fingers held 2 wooden tiles tightly, revealing a lucky, bright red number 10. The young lord sat with his legs crossed arrogantly, holding his tiles amidst the admiring and envious glares of the losers. A 5-petaled purple plum blossom insignia was exquisitely embroidered upon the lapel of the young guest's robe. Ho's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, a cold sweat rolling down her cheek, as she recognized the signature crest, a plum blossom emblem. Impossible. Turning to him with an anxious face, she stammered in a hushed tone, the Manhwa sect. Is our prey this time a disciple of Manhwa? He curled his lips into a profound smirk, reminding her in a low voice, Miss Matt, I believe I told you earlier. His handsome face gleamed beneath the lantern light, his sharp eyes glinting with the shrewd calculation of a seasoned merchant that is not prey, that is a client. Thumtain, the first-hand disciple of the Manhwa sect leader and the youngest plum blossom swordsman in history. His name alone was enough to shake the martial world of the surrounding lands, and yet. He held up a portrait of Thumtain, drawn with ridiculously comical scribbles. Gazing at the portrait, he shook his head with a wry laugh and muttered a harsh truth, his gambling skills are as utterly abysmal as a fool's. Ho crossed her arms in indignation, and grumbled, unbelievable. Didn't you just tell me not to call a client prey? Waving a letter to brush it off, he defended himself. I was merely stating that his skills are like a fool's. Do not nitpick my words. She glanced at the paper and her hand with skepticism. More importantly, was that intelligence accurate? That them Tang's gambling skills were nothing more than those of a mere novice. Manager Kim calmly scanned the gambling hall, then spoke in a measured tone. From what I have observed, his winning streak thus far is. Thun Tang stared intently at the wooden tiles in his hand, a bead of sweat tracing down his tense brow. A triumphant smirk suddenly broke across his face as he confidently shoved a hefty stack of coins into the center of the table, declaring, "A call," and raised another 10 taels. His opponent turned deathly pale, sweat pouring from his brow at Thun Tang's pressing demand. "Show your hand." With trembling hands, the opponent revealed the wooden tiles upon the table, exposing the numbers that would decide the game. Instantly, the crowd erupted into ecstatic cheers, clapping his shoulders in celebration. He won. Our junior brother has won. Thun Tang let out a hearty laugh, sweeping the glittering pile of coins toward himself. "Have you won again?" From a distant corner, Ulho sighed softly as she watched the boisterous crowd. "See, he has won yet again." Ulho murmured in perplexity. "His movements are awkward, and his expressions are stiff. To me, he seems like an utter fool. Could he truly be blessed with such uncanny luck?" Manager Kim curled his lips into a knowing smile, his sharp gaze cutting through to the truth. "Look," he said. If only he knew when to stop. Tilting his head, he turned to Ulho and asked in a low, enigmatic tone, "Lee Mac, do you know what the most terrifying thing on a gambling table is?" Across the room, the flatteries continued unabated. "Splendid work today, junior brother. At this rate, you'll clean out the entire house." Thun Tang threw back his head and laughed in hearty agreement. His opponent curled his lips in a devious smirk, while Thun Tang, utterly oblivious in his arrogance, bragged, "The tiles are favoring me perfectly today." Manager Kim narrowed his eyes, offering a razor-sharp analysis of a gambler's mind. It is precisely at this moment when he is basking in these clumsy, awkward victories. The opponent's face twisted into a sinister expression, wearing the predatory grin of a hunter whose trap was already sprung. Ulho startled, her eyes widening in surprise at her superior's cryptic revelation. Manager Kim's words manifested instantly, like a dread curse falling upon the fate of the thrill-drunk gambler. The tide of the game, once perceived as a grand stroke of luck, began to subtly shift as the new tiles were overturned. The opponent threw his head back in a hearty laugh, throwing his arms wide to embrace his first triumph. "Indeed. This time, the victory is mine." Thun Tang stared at the tiles on the table with bitter regret, while his two sec brothers behind him sighed in dismay. Lost by a single point. He lamented. Beside him, his senior brother offered cold comfort. "A pity, junior brother." Forcing a hollow smile to soothe his own nerves, Thun Tang muttered, "Losing is part of the game. It is nothing." The opponent's razor-sharp gaze scrutinized every micro-expression of his prey. To Thun Tang, the round he had just lost was still but a trivial wager. The dealer's cunning smirk gleamed beneath the dim lanterns. At first, Thun Tang lost only minor stakes, but soon he began to lose monumental wagers by the narrowest of margins. The young swordsman eagerly flipped his tiles in triumphant confidence. "I have this in the bag. Look at this hand." The man opposite curled his lips in a sly grin, twirling a coin between his fingers as he sneered. "My hand is higher by a single point." Enraged, Thun Tang slammed a wooden tile onto the table in defiance. "And what of this?" His opponent nonchalantly turned over a superior tile, thinking Mosti, by some miracle, mine is slightly higher again. The dealer rose to his feet with a triumphant laugh, pretending to be apologetic. "How embarrassing. To keep winning by a single point." Thun Tang's hand gripped his wooden tile so fiercely it trembled, veins bulging along his knuckles as he ground his teeth in silent fury. His face contorted in furious bitterness as his opponent sneered. "Looks like my luck is a little better today." Cold sweat poured down his brow as he stared wildly at the cards. A relentless streak of losses by a mere single point had utterly paralyzed his reason. His two sec brothers hastily urged him, "Let us head back, junior brother. Fortune is not on your side today, and it is late. It is best to return." Turning a deaf ear to their pleas, he gnashed his teeth and thrust his hands into his robes, rummaging with frantic desperation. A heavy string of coins, bound together by thick rope, slammed violently onto the table, the final wager of a desperate, parched gambler. Thun Tang slammed the wealth onto the wooden table, leaving his two sect brothers standing behind him in utter shock. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Shaking, he muttered to himself that this was his entire fortune, resolving to stake everything on this single hand. His face twisted in madness, his eyes wide and bloodshot as he roared, "This time I will win for sure. My gut tells me so." A deathly silence fell over the room. He collapsed back into his chair in utter despair, as his two sect brothers broke into a cold sweat, exchanging glances of deep concern. His two sect brothers quietly backed away to slip away. "We have urgent matters to attend to first, junior brother. Take your time and enjoy." Tang sat dejectedly in a corner of the tavern, his pockets completely empty. From afar, the protagonist and Laho watched him in silence. Leaning forward with his hands on the table, the manager offered a knowing smile. Now, shall we begin? He strolled leisurely beneath the lantern light, with the beauty following closely behind, watching him with curiosity. Time to go to work, nice and easy. In the stillness of the night, a brilliant full moon shone through the drifted clouds, casting its pale light upon the tiled roof of the ancient manor. Tang's thin, trembling hands tore his hair in a fit of sheer panic. Slumped beneath the shadow of the porch, the young swordsman held his head in agony, his face painted with bitter regret and utter helplessness. Gritting his teeth, he let out a bitter laugh. "I am mad. I must have lost my mind." Clawing at his hair in terror, he muttered, "I have squandered my entire fortune. If we return home like this, master will beat me half to death." He startled, snapping his head around as he sensed someone approaching from behind. The protagonist appeared beneath the moonlight, smiling brightly beside Laho. "Greetings, esteemed guest. Might you be in urgent need of some gold?" With a subtle, knowing smile, he pitched his offer, no collateral required. Same-day transaction. Smiling warmly under the moonlight, ready to throw a lifeline to the pitiful debtor, he added, "The mainland bank is always at your service." Clutching his head in confusion, sweat dripping down his face, Tang stammered at the offer. What? What is this?" Slumped on the ground, he glared up in deep suspicion. What? What do you mean? The mainland bank." His face grew pale, as sweat rolled down. "Quick cash. Same-day loans with no collateral. Impossible. You'd err." He wore a warm yet knowing smile, while Laho watched with a keen gaze. "Loan sharks, you mean?" The manager's calculating smile began to draw his prey into the snare. "What you choose to call us is entirely up to you, but I am merely offering a helping hand to one in dire need." Instantly, Tang unsheathed his blade, unleashing a flurry of sharp, flashing strikes to display his formidable might. Standing proud, he bellowed a threat. "How dare you offer a private loan to a plum blossom swordsman of the great Manhwa sect? You must have a death wish." Manager Kim let out a hearty laugh, reaching into his robe as he searched for something. "It seems there has been a slight misunderstanding." A heavy, gleaming string of silver coins was thrust before his eyes, radiating an irresistible allure to one who was utterly penniless. Tang's eyes widened, locking onto the glittering bounty as all of his defenses vanished in an instant. The chief nonchalantly swayed the silver, speaking with utter indifference. "A disciple of the Manhwa sect, a plum blossom swordsman. Your identity means absolutely nothing to me. Is this money not what you desperately crave? You ought to win back the fortune you have lost." Tang thought to himself, "Does he truly not care that I am a disciple of the Manhwa sect?" He stared intently at the massive hoard of silver before him, his mind torn by a violent inner conflict. If only I could have that money. The debt covenant of the Continental Bank was brought forth, clearly outlining the terms of collateral his internal energy. The process is remarkably simple. Just sign this contract, and I shall grant you an immediate cash loan. And the interest rate is exceedingly reasonable. Tang stepped forward and snatched the contract, completing the first step of walking into the snare. The brush glided swiftly across the paper to finalize the covenant, the collateral being none other than his internal energy. "There, I have signed it. Now hand it over, quickly. That money." Wearing a smug smile, he lightly snapped his fingers to signal the completion of the transaction, praising the client's choice. The wooden door slammed shut with brute force. Outside, the manager and his assistant watched the retreating figure of the one who had just fled. Laho remarked, his expression was completely unhinged. To think he would dash away headlong without even a backward glance. Laho was startled to discover a sheet of parchment lying on the ground right beside her feet. She bent down to retrieve the covenant, curiously asking him why a disciple of Manhwa would end up as a client of their bank. Gambling is a vice, but surely he has not committed an atrocity as heinous as the heavenly demon. He turned to look at his assistant. "Do you truly think I select clients based on whether they belong to the righteous or the demonic sects?" She stared back, bewildered. "Righteous or demonic, it matters not. To me, they are all merely martial artists. What matters is whether they possess what we desire." Clad in her white dress, Laho stood in silence, holding the covenant as she listened to her chief's pragmatic conclusion. "It is as simple as that." The assistant remained silent, a bee of cold sweat trickling down as she realized the chilling, terrifying pragmatism of his philosophy. Heavy footsteps echoing from afar suddenly shattered the silence, prompting both of them to turn their heads in vigilance. A scarred, middle-aged man emerged, clutching his agonizing arm as he struggled forward. Memories flashed back, of how effortlessly he had snapped the man's arm. The fellow whose leg had been shattered was also being dragged along. He gazed at the man, recalling the vital acupoints he had sealed just moments before. A fierce band of men emerged, led by a muscular colossus who glared at him in defiance, yet he merely offered a serene, untroubled smile. Genmo arrived with his lackeys to settle the score. Glaring at the guard, he snarled, "Is it those bastards?" The guard trembled, stammering, "Yes, boss." The chief sighed at the messy ordeal. "You should have cleaned up after yourself, Lady Mac." Ulho pouted in defiance. "He told me to hide them in a corner. Why didn't you just tell me to bury them in the dirt in the first place?" Arms crossed, the leader of the venomous snake gang arrogantly declared, "I am Janmo of the venomous snake gang. I hear you laid hands on my men. State your name, and sect at once." Maintaining his signature smile, the manager introduced himself, Continental Bank, Manager Kim. Meanwhile, Ulho stared at their opponent's shiny bald head, thinking, Janmo literally means a long hair, yet this guy is completely bald. Janmo furrowed his brows at the unfamiliar name, then sneered arrogantly, "Continental Bank? Never heard of it. You must be some third-rate nobody who picked up cheap martial arts from some backwater corner." The bald man roared in fury, "You arrogant fool. To act so recklessly without a shred of fear. Do you not know this territory belongs to the venomous snake gang?" Closing his eyes slightly, he offered a contemptuous smile and countered mockingly, "Is that something I am required to know?" The corner of Genmo's eye twitched violently, consumed by rage at his foe's utter disdain. Gritting his teeth, he commanded, "Sever one arm from each of them. Killing them outright would only bring bad luck to our business." "Yes, boss." The lackeys roared in unison. Swords and sabers drawn, they charged forward in a thundering rush, while the two of them remained standing, perfectly still. One thug leaped high into the air, swinging a massive broadsword down toward his head with a blood-curdling shriek. With a graceful sidestep, he effortlessly dodged the blow, and unleashed a lightning-fast kick directly to his assailant's ankle. A sickening crack echoed through the air as the brute's ankle shattered, bent completely out of shape by the devastating force of the kick. The lackey's eyes rolled back in agonizing pain, his face contorting in sheer shock before he could even comprehend what had transpired. He crashed face first onto the dirt, his broadsword slipping from his grasp and clattering away, while Manager Kim stood calmly with his hands clasped behind his back, as if he had never moved an inch. Seeing his comrade fall, another thug lunged forward in a fury, brandishing his sword and roaring, "You bastard!" He tilted his body, evading the razor-sharp blade with effortless grace, the hem of his black robe fluttering in the wind. Drawing his hand back, he gathered his inner kai, conjuring fierce, swirling gusts of wind around his palm as he prepared to counter-strike. A devastating palm strike slammed directly into the attacker's chest, unleashing a violent burst of raw energy that flared into a blinding halo of light. The thug was sent flying backward like a broken kite, kicking up a storm of dust as he collapsed, instantly unconscious. Agonizing shrieks rent the night sky. The fallen lackeys writhed in pain, crying out in vain to their boss for salvation. His eyes widened in sheer horror as the endless screams pierced his ears, cold sweat pouring like rain down his savage face. His pupils dilated with terror. His former bravado vanished, replaced by an uncontrollable trembling before this overwhelming presence. His heart hammered frantically. Beneath the cold moonlight, the silhouette of the black-clad man stood tall and imposing amidst a sea of fallen foes. All of them. In the span of a single breath. He could not believe his eyes, as his elite forces were decimated in an instant. A true monster was revealing itself, radiating a crimson, bloodthirsty aura and wearing a sinister, demonic grin. What manner of god or demon was this man, to possess such terrifying, absolute power? Gulping hard, he desperately tried to summon the last remnants of his composure before facing his foe. Not bad for a brat, he managed to squeeze out a defiant smirk, even as beads of sweat poured down his face. "If you fall to your knees and beg for mercy right now." The giant roared in threat, but a howling gust of icy wind cut him short. Before he could finish, he froze, his eyes widening in terror as a suffocating wave of killing intent pressed close against his face. A flash of light swept past, swift as lightning. The precise strike slammed directly into him, leaving him no time to react. His massive frame was hurled into the air by the sheer force of the impact, sending clouds of dust billowing into the sky. He gasped, coughing up a torrent of fresh blood, his eyes rolling back in excruciating pain from the fatal blow. His colossal body crashed heavily to the ground, lying motionless before the protagonist, who stood there utterly unfazed. "Monster! Save me!" The remaining guards wept, and crawled away in a frantic scramble to escape, not daring to cast a single glance back. The terrified screams of the fleeing guards gradually faded into the distance. A cold, knowing smirk curled the lips of Manager Kim. "I shall spare your life today. But if I hear so much as a whisper of another casino opening in Huan County, do not blame me for what follows. Things will become exceedingly unpleasant for you." Trembling on the ground, his mouth awash with blood, the giant could do nothing but cower in sheer terror. "No, Lady Mo. Next, it is your turn." Ulho flinched in surprise, utterly bewildered by her boss's intentions. The Grand Boss coldly ordered his subordinates to clear away the debris and the defeated rabble. Ulho was left speechless. She walked away, muttering curses under her breath at the ruthless, bald manager who exploited her labor without mercy. He paused, his gaze growing sharp as he stared into the distance, as if plotting something in the shadows. Looking up at the brilliant full moon, he wondered how his esteemed client was faring at this very hour. Meanwhile, within the raucous, brightly lit casino, a dense crowd swarmed around the betting table, eyes glued to the decisive hand. Drenched in sweat, Dun Tang stared wide-eyed in sheer tension at the cards in his hand, his breath coming in ragged, fearful gasps. Damn it. How is this even possible? Have I truly lost 5 consecutive rounds just by a single miserable point? You sons of bitches. You planned this whole thing from the start, didn't you? Bastards. The dealer shrugged. I am just as surprised as you are. But what can we do? It seems fortune simply refuses to smile upon you. He mockingly asked if the disciple of Manhwa intended to throw a tantrum over a lost bet, forcing them Tang to gnash his teeth in silent humiliation. The crowd erupted into jeering laughter, mocking that even the great Manhwa sect amounted to nothing at the gambling table. A cold moon hung high above the roof of the casino, bearing silent witness to a soul that had just been utterly consumed by greed. The wooden doors burst open, and Tham Tang stumbled out in a frenzy, his face pale and distorted with absolute panic. Manager Kim, who stood waiting, offered a welcoming smile, feigning surprise as he greeted the client who had emerged much earlier than anticipated. Upon seeing his savior, the tension drained from Tham Tang's face, replaced by an expression of ecstatic joy, as if he had just grasped a lifeline. He frantically begged to borrow more gold to recoup his losses, while the other raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise at how deeply the gambler had sunk. Yes. I swear it this time. Just once more. If you lend me coin just this once, I will win everything back and repay you in full. Wearing a knowing smile, he agreed to the loan, but gently reminded the man that this time, collateral of equal value would be required. Thun Tang froze as he remembered the protective amulet he always kept close, a final glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. What about this? This is the Manhwa jade pendant that my master bestowed upon me. Having completely lost his mind, Thun Tang surrendered the jade pendant as collateral and heirloom he would normally never have parted with. The manager offered a thin smile, handing over a string of coins. This is more than enough. Here is your additional loan. Thun Tang greedily snatched the coins, stammering his gratitude. The doors of the gambling den slammed shut before him. He and Laho stood silently in the shadows, watching as the biting night wind swept over them. 2 hours later, the exact same scene repeated itself, like an endless cycle. Tang burst through the doors, screaming in a frenzy for another loan, while Manager Kim stood by, wearing a smirk of quiet triumph. His face drenched in sweat, then Tang's eyes bulged as he swore on the very name of Manhwa that if he won this hand, he would repay both principal and interest tenfold. The chief maintained a tranquil smile, soothingly telling his client to remain calm, assuring him of their unwavering trust. The third loan. Then Tang's hands trembled violently as he clutched the 3 wooden tiles, sweat dripping steadily onto the table. Gritting his teeth till they ground together, drenched in sweat, he muttered a stream of desperate, helpless curses. The 4th loan. The 5th loan. And then Tang collapsed over the gambling table, his fists clenched in absolute despair as agonized groans tore from the depths of his soul. He threw his head back and wailed in madness, his tear-filled eyes brimming with utter despair as the realization sank and he had lost everything. His piercing, wretched scream echoed from the wooden cabin, reverberating through the dark, silent forest of the night. Manager Kim offered a small, satisfied smile, declaring that their work for the night was done. Turning on his heel, he began to walk away. It is time to clock out, Lady Mo. Host stared blankly after him, astonished by her superior's sheer indifference. Anxiously, she questioned him about recovering the borrowed funds, pointing hesitantly toward the cabin as another agonizing wail pierced the air, guessing he had lost once more. Suppressing a wary yawn as he walked, he reassured her, "Do not worry. They say that both soy sauce and debt only grow richer the longer they are left to age." Ho knitted her brows, a bee of cold sweat on her temple. But what if he plays innocent later and denies ever taking a loan? Or worse, what if he dares you to slice open his belly to take it? Manager Kim paused, turning back with a knowing smile. Why, that would be even better. Ho could only stare back at him, utterly bewildered. His expression darkened, a sinister, murderous smile creeping across his face. Because then, a shawl gladly grant his wish and split that arrogant belly wide open. Shrouded in sea-white clouds, the Mount Huasek lay peaceful as cherry blossoms bloomed in brilliant splendor beneath the morning sun. Along the silent wooden corridor, warm sunlight filtered through the lattice windows, casting a serene yet solemn aura over the halls. Behind the tightly shut doors along the endless hallway, a dark chaos lay hidden from the tranquil world outside. Thun Tang sat huddled in a corner of his white bed, his head buried tightly in his hands, utterly consumed by despair. The once proud swordsman now trembled violently, his face deathly pale as he clawed at his hair in a fit of near madness. Staring with bloodshot eyes, he muttered in sheer panic, "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" Regret suffocated his mind. I've truly gone mad. What on earth have I done? Memories of taking high-interest loans from manager Kim flashed back. He cursed himself, realizing that racking up private debts under the name of Manhwa was not the end of his folly. He shuddered as he recalled his own greedy smirk when he pawned the purple cloud jade pendant bestowed upon him by his master. His hands, still clutching his skull, shook uncontrollably at the bleak prospect of the future. Slumping miserably onto the corner of the bed, he groaned, "If this is discovered, expulsion will be the least of my worries. Master will skin and flay me alive." Bang! Bang! A sudden, frantic pounding on the door shattered the silence, making his heart leap into his throat. The respectful voice of a junior disciple filtered through. "Senior brother, are you there? The sect leader is summoning you." Thun Tang's eyes whitened, his entire body freezing as though he had just heard a summons from the depths of hell. Drained of all color, his lips trembled soundlessly, as if trapped in a living nightmare. His junior's voice felt like a death warrant suspended directly over his head. Inside the vast grand hall, Thun Tang prostrated himself upon the wooden floor, his head bowed, before the majestic figure who stood waiting with hands clasped behind his back. Tang, the sect leader of the Manhwa sect, the venerable Hyunjong, spoke. His voice was commanding, looking down with an expression both benevolent and stern. Trembling, Thun Tang kept his face lowered, as he stammered, "Yes. Sect leader. You missed the morning training today. You have never been one for negligence. Is your mind perhaps elsewhere of late? I beg your forgiveness. I was feeling unwell." He excused himself with a deep bow, thinking bitterly of how he could possibly focus on training when gambling debts had kept him awake all night. The sect leader let out a soft sigh of disappointment, reaching his hand into the wide sleeve of his robe. "To think a plum blossom swordsman of our sect cannot even look after his own well-being." With a swift, decisive motion, Hyunjong pulled an object from his sleeve and tossed it straight toward his kneeling disciple. The object clattered onto the wooden floor right before him, causing Thun Tang to startle in sheer confusion. He stared wide-eyed at the object, unable to believe his eyes. Resting silently upon the floor was a black wooden box, exquisitely carved with golden plum blossoms. He drew a sharp breath as the faint, wonderfully soothing and pure scent of medicinal herbs wafted to his nose. "This is the plum blossom pill. Take it, and restore your strength." He gasped in utter shock. "What? The plum blossom pill?" With a trembling hand, he reached for the latch, and slowly lifted the lid of the precious wooden box. His heart hammered against his ribs as the box opened. A radiant violet crimson glow burst forth, revealing a perfectly round, sparkling spirit elixir nestled within. An authentic plum blossom pill. The legendary elixir that every martial artist coveted now lay directly before his eyes. He swallowed hard, a sudden realization washing over him. Instead of a harsh scolding, "I am given a priceless elixir. This means my late-night gambling has not been discovered." Cradling the precious box in both hands, his eyes welled with tears. "I thank you, respected sect leader, for your immense grace." Tum gazed at his beloved disciple, offering a warm, gentle smile of deep benevolence. "If you fall, there will be no future left for Manhwa. Now, withdraw, and take your rest." Tears welling in his eyes, Thun Tang stared at the precious elixir, his heart consumed by remorse and shame. A fleeting wave of emotion stirred within him, touched by his master's warm solicitude. Yet in the very next breath, a dark, sinful thought flashed through his desperate, impoverished mind. "If I sell this, perhaps I can redeem the jade pendant." Within the deserted courtyard of the Manhwa sect, Thun Tang huddled beneath the eaves, a solitary figure swallowed by the darkness. Calculating the sums in his head, he felt utterly wretched. He was worse than a common beast. He started, snapping his head up as a sudden commotion echoed from the sect's main gates. The murmurs drifting over made Thun Tang wonder what is happening out there. Taoist masters, please, protect us. Please, arise. I shall sincerely pray for you all." Impoverished commoners had traveled far, seeking the spiritual blessings of the Manhwa sect in hopes of finding peace. Their eyes shone with absolute faith as they reverently offered the Taoists carefully wrapped packages of rice cakes and fruit. The noble grace of his fellow disciples stood in stark contrast to the wretched dishevelment of a defeated gambler. The solemn dignity of the prestigious sect suffocated his remaining self-respect. Slumped on the ground, his face deathly pale and cold sweat dripping down, Thun Tang realized the depths of his pathetic downfall. He averted his eyes from the sacred sight, bitterly cursing his own wretched soul. He slammed his fist against the ground in anger, desperately clawing to retain his final remnants of reason. Staring intently at the precious wooden box, he muttered to himself, "Yes. This is the only way. This is an unavoidable choice. I will sell it to the pawnshop." He rationalized, "Even if I consume the plum blossom pill, it will only restore a fraction of my strength. But if I sell it, I can reclaim the jade pendant. Compared to the sin of losing a treasure bestowed by master forever, surely selling a spiritual elixir is a far lighter offense." He deceived himself with a hollow resolve. "First, I must extinguish this immediate fire. Afterward, I will devote myself entirely to cultivation to bring glory to Manhwa. That is the true path." Thun Tang fell silent, cold sweat streaming down as his soul tore itself apart over this sinful decision. Turning on his heel, he walked away. Once this is resolved, just this once I will never set foot in a gambling den again. A brilliant full moon cast its light upon the curved tiled roofs of the sect, shrouded in an eerie silence. Hurried, stealthy footsteps shattered the quiet as Thun Tang began his clandestine escape. A dark shadow vaulted high into the air, scaling the formidable walls of the Manhwa sect with blinding speed. The airborne figure was sharply silhouetted against the luminous moon, like a night bat fleeing into the dark. Then Tang landed soundlessly outside the fortress wall, bending his knees to absorb the impact of the drop. Letting out a quiet sigh of relief, he cast a wary glance around to ensure none had witnessed his clandestine escape over the wall. His face clouded with belated regret, he closed his eyes and silently offered a plea of forgiveness to his master. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoing from the depths of the forest trail wound the tension in the air to a breaking point. Junior brother Thun Tang. A familiar voice rang out, startling him so violently that cold sweat began to pour down like rain. His heart seized in his chest as he beheld a tall figure standing with crossed arms, waiting beneath the pale moonlight. The middle-aged man offered a gentle yet knowing smile. Where do you intend to go at such a late hour, junior brother? Thun Tang's eyes widened in sheer terror as he cursed inwardly, his senior brother still on night patrol at this ungodly hour. He quickly bowed in deep reverence, thanking his senior brother for his tireless night patrol, though his heart screamed in utter despair upon recognizing Thun Dime the most ruthless and strict disciplinarian of the Manhwa sect. Dismissing the gesture, Thun Dime's smile faded into a cold gaze. Cast aside those empty pleasantries. Where are you heading in the dead of night? Scratching his head, Thun Tang offered a forced, deceitful smile. I felt somewhat restless inside, so I came out to catch some fresh air. Thun Dime's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Is it truly just the fresh air? Thun Dime's razor-sharp gaze locked onto him. If it is merely the night air you seek, why must you scale the outer walls to find it? Panic seized Thun Tang as sweat drenched his brow. That flimsy excuse was far too weak to deceive his senior brother. Thun Dime stood tall and imposing in the dark, arms crossed, staring down his junior brother with deep suspicion. The cold, piercing gaze of Thun Dime scrutinized his every micro-movement. Thun Tang's hand trembled as he pressed it against his chest, desperate to conceal the precious treasure hidden within his robes. What are you hiding in your robes? Thun Dime demanded. Thun Tang stumbled backward in flustered panic. Nothing, brother. Nothing at all. Hand it over, let me see. Reaching into Thun Tang's robes, Thun Dime snatched the lacquered wooden box. Thun Tang lunged in panic to stop him, but it was already too late. Startled, Thun Dime pried open the lid. What is this? Could this be the plum blossom elixir? Where did you obtain such a secret elixir? The master. The master bestowed it upon me. Stunned, Thun Dime fell into a pensive silence, thinking to himself, did the sect leader truly do this? Suddenly, Thun Dime's expression shifted, his eyes widening in revelation. As expected of the master's discerning eye, he has finally recognized your hidden potential. Here, take it back. Receiving the box, Thun Tang murmured, thank you, senior brother. When Thun Dime questioned why he was smuggling the divine medicine out in the dead of night, Thun Tang's mind raced desperately to manufacture a lie. Forcing a sheepish smile, he fabricated an excuse. The expectations of our fellow disciples weighed too heavily upon me, so I intended to consume it in secret under the shroud of night. Thun Dime fell silent, tears welling in his eyes and streaming down his face, deeply moved. To think your secrecy was born of such selflessness for your brothers. Forgive my ignorance for ever doubting a heart as noble as Mount Tay. Thun Tang offered a strained smile. It is quite all right, brother. I take no offense. Clapping a hand onto his junior's shoulder, Thun Dime offered to guard him. Consume it right here, right now, and I shall protect you. Thun Tang's eyes bulged in pure terror. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead as his face contorted in sheer panic. Right here. Right now. Thun Dime beamed with radiant enthusiasm. The plum blossom elixir takes effect the moment it is swallowed. It is best to let your senior brother guide and regulate your kai. Without a single wasted motion, the senior brother immediately sat down. Thun Dime excitedly urged his junior brother to sit. Looking at his senior brother's face, Thun Tang inwardly cursed the stubborn fool. How can you be so jovial in a situation like this? I deeply appreciate senior brother's kindness, but I am accustomed to cultivating alone. Nonsense. The potency of the plum blossom elixir is immense. The slightest slip, and you will fall into kai deviation. Why such formality between brothers of the same sect? Let us begin. Thun Tang stood frozen, sweat pouring like rain, cursing as everything spiraled completely out of control. He repeatedly feigned sore muscles and a stomachache to stall for time, but his ever-attentive senior brother merely told him to relieve himself and return at once. A suffocating silence fell upon the clearing as the two stood staring blankly at each other. Thun Tang's face darkened into a soulless mask of despair as he realized he had reached a dead end. With a soft click, the plum blossom carved wooden box popped open, revealing the violet elixir within. Trembling, he sat cross-legged with the elixir in hand, while his senior brother closed in behind him, raising his hands to channel supportive energy. The hand holding the medicine shook violently as sweat rolled down his face. This pill was the death sentence for his martial arts. Closing his eyes in bitter resignation, he put the elixir into his mouth, bracing himself for the cruel end. A heavy, dry gulp echoed as the pill slid down his throat. A torrent of azure troopy flared violently, enveloping both of their bodies in the dark of night. His hands, clasped in a meditative mudra, were shrouded in a surging, tempestuous wave of pure energy. Dantang closed his eyes to regulate his true kai, which radiated a brilliant glow around him. Incredible. I never expected your true kai to reach such a state of absolute purity. Indeed, Master's foresight was flawless. Congratulations, junior brother. Dantang sprang to his feet, standing tall with resolute confidence. He clasped his hands together, owing with solemn reverence. My deepest gratitude for your benevolence, senior brother. Thanks to you, I can now strive to reach greater heights. Lowering his head, he forced a hollow smile. It is all thanks to your grace, senior brother. Under the moonlight of the deep forest, Dantang slumped lifelessly against the base of an ancient tree, utterly drained. Leaning his distorted, despairing face against the bar, he muttered to himself, it is all over. The plum blossom elixir was gone, swallowed into his stomach, no longer to be sold. As its immense power surged violently through him, he cursed under his breath in agonizing pain. There was absolutely no way he could amass such a colossal sum of money in so short a time. The creditors of the Continental Bank would soon come hunting, and his secret gambling debts would be exposed to the entire sect. Expulsion was certain. He recalled the bizarre contract he had signed, pledging his entire internal energy as collateral to Manager Kim. In silence, he bowed his head, trembling before the pitch-black future that awaited him. Suddenly, his eyes widened in sheer astonishment as a mad, wild idea struck him. Cold sweat poured down his face, as he muttered, wait. Just wait a moment. Let me think this through. He slowly forced himself to stand, hunching over, as he made a reckless decision. A sinister thought flashed through his mind: a debt only exists as long as there is a creditor to collect it. What would happen if the debt collectors simply vanished from the face of the earth? The corner of his mouth curled into a twisted, murderous grin, his eyes hardening with resolve. At worst, they were merely mediocre loan sharks of Hawaiian. With his prestige as a plum blossom swordsman, once his mind was made up, erasing them without a trace would be effortless. A most fortuitous coincidence. The internal energy coursing through his veins was surging more violently than ever, fueled by the plum blossom pill he had just swallowed. Standing tall, he drew his sword. Why on earth should he trouble himself to pay them back? His face contorted with cruelty, his eyes bloodshot with murderous intent. He only had to slaughter them all, and it would be over. In the dead of night, the town at the foot of Mount Hua lay shrouded in a deathly silence. Quiet footsteps pressing against the stone tiles heralded a bloody storm. Dantang stood motionless in the darkness of the night, lost in grim calculations. He let out a heavy sigh, breaking into a sweat as he made the absolute maddest decision of his life. This was indeed the place. The Huayan Inn. The creditor's words echoed in his ears. We are staying in room 5 of the Huayan Inn. If you want to pay us back, come there. His gaze darkened with a ruthless determination to erase all traces. He gently pushed the door open and stepped inside, casting a solitary silhouette against the light. The corridor lay desolate under the dim, sickly yellow glow of a hanging lantern. His footsteps pressed slowly against the wooden floorboards, radiating a palpable killing intent as he moved toward the guest rooms. From the very beginning, the answer had been incredibly simple: the debt would perish alongside the creditor. I will slaughter them cleanly, take back the jade pendant, and forget everything. He stopped before the wooden door carved with the character for 5, room 5. The black painted character 5 stood out vividly, like a preordained target. He stared intently at the fateful number, his breathing growing rapid and shallow. It was indeed room 5. From within the room came the low murmur of voices. The voices of a man and a woman drifted out, muffled yet absolutely unmistakable. It was undoubtedly those two. Dantang's hand clenched the hilt of his sword, veins bulging with surging fury. I shall end this in a single blow. Forgive me that it has come to this. Yet, to die together means you shall not be lonely. Gathering his entire strength, Dantang stumped his foot down, shattering the wooden floor into flying splinters. Lowering his stance, he gripped the hilt with both hands and unleashed the decisive blow to wipe his debts clean. He roared in madness, his killing intent burning bright. Plum blossom sword art. 7th form. The sword strike, carrying a brilliant pink energy, tore through space in a colossal shaped slash. Scattering blossoms. The terrifying force shredded the entire ceiling and walls into 100 shattered fragments. A thunderous explosion shook the neighborhood, launching the entire roof of the Hoa Duong in high into the night sky. Splinters of wood and dust rained down, shrouding the murderer's silhouette. The room was now reduced to desolate ruins, gaping open beneath the wind-swept sky. He whispered amidst the dust, certain his 2 creditors had been blown to pieces. It is finally over. The last vestige of his conscience had utterly crumbled. regret. Guilt. No, on the contrary, it was pure relief. With his hands already stained with blood, fear no longer held sway over him. As though a heavy burden had been lifted, the nightmare of his overwhelming debts was finally settled through violence. A frantic clamor rose from below and people sought the cause of the explosion. Suddenly, he remembered his ultimate prize, the jade pendant. He searched frantically, sweat pouring down in anxiety, as the townspeople drew near. His eyes widened as he caught a glint of light reflecting from a corner of the room. Peering through a crack in the splintered wood, a greedy grin slowly spread across his face. Found it. Hastily snatching it up, he used his lightness skill to flee the scene. Beneath the brilliant moonlight, a dark shadow leaped swiftly across the tiled roofs. He landed cleanly, then bolted at a breakneck pace, shattering the stillness of the street. Like a gust of wind, he hurtled past the tightly clustered houses at a terrifying speed. With every heavy stride pounding against the earth, he poured all his strength into his escape. His face was drenched in sweat as he gasped for breath, yet his eyes shone with raw exhilaration. His breath came in hot, ragged gasps as his fist clenched tight. A low chuckle escaped his throat, breaking the heavy tension. His grin twisted in madness, and he burst into a triumphant laugh, exulting in his dark achievement. It is over. At long last, it is truly over. He felt as though he had just awakened from a long, grueling nightmare. In his relief and jubilation, he believed that everything had finally returned to its proper course. Perhaps that was why Tang made a mistake he would ordinarily never commit. The night in Huayan was full of eye and ears he should have taken a secluded, winding path to return. Yet, utterly consumed by the joy of having cast off his burden. From atop a roof, a towering figure stood in absolute silence, watching the fleeing man below. He remained entirely unaware that someone was silently watching him. Beneath the moonlight, a stern face with eyes as sharp as blades scrutinized his movements. The Manhwa sect lay shrouded in the solemn, silent night. Tang cradled the purple cloud jade pendant in his hands. The treasure had finally returned. Now he could forget everything. But a sudden, urgent knocking at the door cut his thoughts short. "Are you in there, Tang?" That voice. It was. He softly muttered the name of Martial Uncle Hyu as the door slowly creaked open. Elder Hyu stepped inside, exuding a cold and imposing aura. "You are up rather late." "Yes. My training was not going well, so." Hyu arched an eyebrow in skepticism. With hands clasped behind his back, the martial uncle paced slowly, his disciple breaking into a cold sweat as he watched him. "I heard that a great disturbance broke out in Huayan County tonight. An inn was completely trashed." Hyu cast a sidelong glance, his voice laced with implication. Tang jolted in fear upon hearing his martial uncle assert that the culprit had used none other than the Manhwa swordplay. "Show me your hands." "Pardon." Wielding a sword always leaves traces. His eyes widened in sheer horror, cold sweat pouring down his skin like rain. Tense to the breaking point, he swallowed hard, trying desperately to regain his composure. The hand of the culprit slowly extended into the faint moonlight. His hands trembled uncontrollably before his stern martial uncle. Hyu scrutinized every crevice of his disciple's fingers. The martial uncle's eyes narrowed, betraying a bone-chilling killing intent. Shrink. The cold ring of a drawing sword echoed as the gleaming blade pointed straight at his throat. His mouth gaped in sheer terror, his feet rooted to the spot as the icy steel pressed against his neck. His martial uncle's face darkened with fury. "Answer me. Why did you commit such an act?" Trembling, he recoiled and stammered, "Martial uncle. What do you mean? Do you intend to feign innocence to the bitter end?" His martial uncle's voice hardened with bitter disappointment. "I saw you walking back from the inn, strolling down the main road, and you were even smiling." Tang had strolled nonchalantly down the deserted street, utterly unaware that the martial uncle of discipline stood upon the rooftops, observing his every move, using the plum blossom sword art to slaughter commoners. "I'm deeply ashamed that you are a disciple of Manhwa." Cold sweat drenched his brow, his eyes widening in absolute terror now that the truth was laid bare. His legs losing all strength, the sinner collapsed heavily onto the floor. He slammed his forehead against the floor, before the trembling blade, crying out, "This disciple deserves 10,000 deaths." Driven to desperation, he wept aloud and confessed, I gambled. His defenses crumbled, and all his dark secrets came pouring out like a bursting dam. He recalled the day his descent began, the intoxicating rush of winning grandly amidst the seductive cheers of the crowd. Yet fortune proved fleeting. A relentless streak of losses drove him to clutch his cards in a frenzied desperation. The zenith of his depravity arrived when he recklessly wagered the priceless purple cloud jade pendant upon the table. And then, a sinister grin appeared, heralding a tragedy from which there was no return. He remembered the alluring Laho appearing in the night beside his dread-inducing creditor. Accompanying her was Manager Kim, whose false smile masked an overwhelming aura of power. Weeping, he pleaded, "I intended to pay it back. But it kept losing, and the debt just piled up. In the end, I'd only thought of reclaiming the jade pendant at all costs." His martial uncle's face darkened with fury at the excuse. So you killed them. Did you truly believe the debt would vanish if you simply slaughtered your creditors? Thumbtack slammed his head against the wooden floor repeatedly. Forgive me, martial uncle. I deserve 10,000 deaths. Please, grant me mercy, just this once. I am willing to accept any punishment. Thumbtack remained prostrate before the biting steel, his entire body trembling as he awaited the final judgment of the elder of the discipline hall. Hugh slowly sheathed his sword, letting out a soft sigh before coldly telling him to rise. Martial uncle. Turning his back to walk toward the window, he sighed heavily, tormented by the grave transgression of his martial nephew. A shadow of contemplation crossed his stern face, his gaze drifting into the distance as if weighing a decision of immense gravity. Hugh gazed pensively at the moon beyond the window, and spoke slowly. A rising star of Manhwa cannot be allowed to ruin himself in such a manner. He closed his eyes, making an unexpected decision to shield the center. I shall turn a blind eye to this matter. Stunned, tears of remorse and relief rolled down his blood-smeared cheeks. Martial uncle. Hugh turned to look straight at him, warning him in a stern voice, this does not mean you have the right to slaughter innocent civilians. However, there is one exception. His expression softened into a knowing smile, and that is because there is a grander cause known as Manhwa. With cold sweat dripping down his chin, the sinner held his breath, hanging on to every life-saving word from his martial uncle. Martial uncle. He hastily bowed, kowtowing repeatedly, as he stammered, Thank you so much, martial uncle. The choked, sobbing cries of the spared man echoed through the room, while his martial uncle listened in solemn silence. Suddenly remembering something, Hugh turned his head and asked, by the way, those people you claim to have slain, who did you say they were? Clasping his hands behind his back, he gazed out at the misty peaks of Mount Hua shimmering beneath the moonlight. Even if they were loan sharks, they surely did not deserve death. We ought to pray for their souls from Mount Hua. I do not recall their names clearly, but... Thumbtack confessed with a shudder beneath the cold moonlight. I believe they referred to themselves as the Continental Bank. At the mention of those 4 words, the Continental Bank, Hugh's face paled, and his hand violently seized the man's collar. And what was that man's name? Thumbtack's eyes widened in sheer terror as he was hoisted into the air with a single hand, his martial uncle's face, radiating pure bloodlust, pressing close to his own. Cold sweat pouring down his brow, he stammered in utter panic, Martial uncle, what is wrong? Hugh's face darkened with an ominous shadow, his voice dropping to a low, thunderous rumble. What did you just say? That. Thumbtack's pupils contracted in fear, bleeding from the bruise on his forehead as he struggled to answer. As said, the Continental Bank. Hugh's grip on his collar tightened until his hand trembled, as if that name had struck a chord of primal terror from his past. Feeling the tremor in his martial uncle's hand, he looked up, hopelessly bewildered and terrified. The Continental Bank. Did you truly say the Continental Bank? Yes, I am certain. What was that man's name? Thumbtack stammered, sweating profusely as he desperately racked his brain to recall the name of that terrifying creditor. Well, it was definitely Manager Kim. Hugh's eyes stretched wide in sheer horror, his pupils contracting at the mention of that hauntingly familiar name. Drenched in a cold sweat, the hall of law altar stood frozen, as if hearing a summons from the depths of hell itself. Urgent, frantic footsteps shattered the silence atop the tiled roofs of Mount Hua, rushing straight toward the sect leader's chamber. The door was violently flung open, abruptly severing the train of thought of the supreme leader who sat beside his tea table. Hugh burst into the room, pale and frantic, shouting in a panic that stripped away all his dignity. Sect leader. Hugh, what is the meaning of this commotion in the dead of night? Sect leader Hyantong calmly inquired. Sect leader, we have a grave matter on our hands. What is there to be in such a frenzy about? You are an elder, maintain at least some of your dignity. The sect leader remained utterly composed, his hand holding a calligraphy brush as he gently wrote 2 characters to admonish his panic, junior brother calm mind. In his study, Hyantong slowly lectured the tip of a sword, and the nib of a brush must always maintain absolute stillness, like pristine water and a tranquil mirror. From the doorway, Hugh, drenched in cold sweat, cried out in sheer panic, the Continental Silver Bank. The Continental Silver Bank has appeared. Suddenly, an invisible wave of killing intent surged, causing the sect leader's hand to tremble violently. The brush froze mid-stroke, leaving a dark, jagged blotch of ink that ruined the calligraphy. The tranquility was shattered completely. The brush slipped from his grasp, striking the wooden floor with a hollow clack. The brush rolled away, leaving a chaotic trail of black ink. The sect leader stared blankly at it, seized by a dire premonition. His eyes widened in sheer shock, cold sweat pouring down as he heard that haunting name. He stammered, what did you say? The atmosphere in the main hall became suffocatingly tense. Hugh prostrated himself on the wooden floor, bowing his head before the still stunned sect leader. Hyantong fell silent for a long time, his expression extremely tense. His lips pressed thin as he tried to process the earth-shattering news. He swallowed with great difficulty, his throat burning with bitterness, as the specter of the past, known as the Continental Silver Bank, loomed close once more. Trying to regain his composure, the sect leader demanded in rapid succession, why would the Continental Silver Bank suddenly appear? What on earth are you talking about? What does that have to do with our Manhwa? And he looked up, reporting in a trembling voice at his Thumtang. He said, he has killed someone from the Continental Silver Bank. The sect leader's pupils contracted in shock, his face completely pale at the heinous crime of his prized disciple. The sect leader leaped to his feet in panic. Is that true? Are they truly dead? And Hu hurriedly replied, that has not been confirmed yet, senior brother. And Tung shut his eyes, his aging face contorting in pain and fear of the sect's impending annihilation, as he muttered in despair, killing them. The people of the Continental Silver Bank. After a moment of hesitation, his eyes grew cold and resolute as he declared authoritatively, in the name of the authority of the Plum Blossom Token, I command summon all disciples immediately. Hu was struck with absolute horror upon hearing of the supreme token, the Plum Blossom Token, a sacred symbol reserved only for the most critically grave commands. A powerful shout echoed through the dim room, bring the Tang here, as well. I must hear in clear detail whom he killed, where, and how. Hu received the command, and withdrew. Just as he reached the massive wooden doors, Hu's steps suddenly faltered in hesitation. Sect leader. Hu's hand gripped the door handle, trembling violently with fear. Could it truly be those two monsters? Tung stood frozen, breaking into a cold sweat at the dire news. He fell deep into thought, his face exceedingly grim. The great war with the demonic sect. Today, almost no one on Mount Horo recognized that name anymore, and the current sect leader was one of the few who still knew. Memories of the past flooded back, of when he, then a young disciple covered in mud and blood, had stared in wide-eyed horror at the scene of devastation. The young disciple collapsed to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm, as a savage blaze raged behind him, devouring everything in the night. How could he ever forget the devastating sight of countless disciples' corpses strewn about, swords snapped in two, and blood painting the courtyard crimson? A single soul had reduced the entirety of Mount Hua to a desolate wasteland. A tall, cold figure walking through the sea of flames, leading a child, leading a ruined sect in his wake. Tung squeezed his eyes shut and then opened them, his gaze filled with dread and anxiety before the specter of the past. I do not know. But if it is truly them, the consequences will be catastrophic. Hu spoke hesitantly within the main hall. Teeth grinding in helpless rage, sweat dripped down his face, betraying his extreme tension. The sect leader raised his head, his sharp, resolute gaze commanding swift action. The very survival of Mount Hua is under threat. In the grand courtyard, hundreds of disciples had assembled in orderly rows, solemnly awaiting their orders in the dead of night. The disciples began to whisper, confusion and anxiety etched on every face at this sudden, unusual summons. The whispers spread as they leaned their heads close together, anxiously murmuring for any scrap of information. One disciple yawned wearily, exhausted from being abruptly awoken in the dead of night. What on earth is going on in the middle of the night? The disciple beside him shook his head, replying that he had no idea. This was the first time they had seen an emergency summons issued via the Plum Blossom Token. They whispered in fear, wondering if the demonic sect was invading. One speculated that if the Plum Blossom Token was indeed issued, even the secular disciples would be summoned back, but his companion dismissed it as impossible. In the history of the Mount Hua sect, a sudden nighttime summons had never occurred unless an external force was launching a direct invasion. The sound of hurried footsteps shattered the clamor, forcing everyone into a collective silence as they turned their eyes toward the entrance. The sect leader and the elders solemnly ascended the stone steps toward the dais, their faces grim and heavy with gravity. Sect leader Tung stepped forward, projecting a commanding majesty before the hundreds of disciples. Severity was etched onto his aged face, his sharp eyes piercing downward as if to look through the very souls of everyone present. The disciples stirred in hushed whispers, cold sweat breaking out under the oppressive tension as they wondered what could have forced the sect leader to issue an emergency summons. It was an expression never before seen on the sect leader's face. His usual gentle demeanor had vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. The entire courtyard fell dead silent. Not a single soul dared to utter a sound under the overwhelming gaze of their revered sect leader. Thung Tang. He commanded the guilty disciple to step forward. Instantly, the crowd parted, exposing Thung Tang, who stood frozen in sheer bewilderment. He swallowed hard, cold sweat streaming down his pale, bloodless face, knowing that his end had come. With heavy steps, he dragged himself toward the main hall, trembling. He bowed his head and clasped his hands in salutation before the sect leader, who stood imposing like a great mountain. Sect leader, for what matter have you summoned this disciple? Without a word of warning, the sect leader swung his hand, unleashing a devastating slap directly across Thum Tang's face, sending him flying to the shock of all the gathered disciples. He crashed to the ground, writhing in agony, as Tung looked down from above with a wrath that pierced the heavens. You miserable bastard. Do you have any idea what you have just done? His fury unabated, the sect leader lunged forward to deliver another brutal kick to his prized disciple. Bentang coughed up fresh blood in agony, his eyes wide in disbelief that his once benevolent master could strike him so mercilessly. The Continental Bank. How dare you lay a finger on someone from the Continental Bank? The relentless sounds of the beating struck the disciples dumb, cold sweat pouring down them like rain in the face of this unprecedented wrath. The Continental Bank. In a panic, Lion Hu threw his arms around the out-of-control Haiyan Tom to hold him back. Sect leader. He will die. At this rate, he will truly die. With eyes wide and veins bulging, the sect leader roared in a frenzied exactly. It would be better if he just died. The elders rushed forward to restrain the sect leader, who was radiating a terrifying murderous intent over the motionless disciple. Sect leader, we beg of you. Calm down. The sect leader gasped heavily, his chest heaving, cold sweat drenching him as his fellow sect members held him back. Thun Tang lay prostrate on the cold stone floor, his breathing ragged and incredibly weak. His blood-smeared face was tightly shut as he endured the excruciating agony, fresh blood continuously trickling from the corner of his mouth. The sect leader glared at the fallen disciple, his facial muscles twitching as he gnashed his teeth in tense helplessness. Fool. You have ruined Manhwa. Thun Tang slightly opened his eyes, his glazed, pained gaze shifting toward his elders. Summoning his last ounce of strength, he struggled to pull himself up, and knelt at the sect leader's feet, coughing up blood repeatedly. His hands gripped the ground tightly, fresh driplets of blood dripping down to pool into a dark crimson stain. Master. I know I was wrong to gamble. And to kill. But I do not understand why you would go to such lengths merely because of who they are. I truly cannot comprehend it. Unable to contain his fury, Lion Tongue delivered another thunderous slap straight across his face. You brainless fool. Gambling. Worder. Do you truly believe I am punishing you for such trifles? If you had slit the throat of some beggar or lowly thug, do you think I would have even blamed you? What? The night wind swept through the desolate courtyard of the main hall. Thun Tang clutched his swollen cheek in sheer bewilderment, while the sect leader stood over him, panting with unrestrained fury. Veins bulged on the sect leader's tightly clenched fists as he growled, "Silence. Just answer what I ask you. Those people from the mainland bank, are they truly dead?" Haiyan Tom shrieked in absolute panic, cold sweat drenching his brow. "Please. Just tell me that they are dead." Cowering flat on the ground, his bruised face trembling with terror, he whimpered, Yes, sect leader. They are dead, without a doubt." Haiyan Tom loomed over him, his gaze piercing. "The corpses. Did you confirm the bodies?" He hesitated, stammering, "I believe so." Blinded by rage, the sect leader lunged forward and seized the disciple by the collar. "Speak clearly, Nat. Did you see them draw their last breath with your own eyes?" On the verge of tears, he stammered, "About that. I collapsed the entire inn room using the plum blossom sword heart. I assume they must be dead." "Assume? Did you just say you assumed? You did not verify it yourself?" He tried to protest that the entire structure had crumbled, but was instantly hurled violently to the ground. "Fool. You do not even know for certain if they are dead. What will you do if they are still alive? What will you do if they survive?" Sprawled flat on the cold, hard earth, he remained utterly speechless in the face of such devastating wrath. Yet deep within his heart, Thun Tang still seethed with resentment, finding the punishment deeply unjust. The dilapidated inn had clearly been utterly decimated by his devastating strike. The ceiling had caved in completely, and the massive wooden pillars had snapped in two. Even a formidable master of the martial world would struggle to survive beneath such ruins. How could a mere merchant who cared for nothing but coin, like him, have possibly survived? However, the sect leader thought otherwise, for he knew all too well the terrifying strength of that manager. How much better it would have been had you been crushed to death in the inn along with them. His voice was chillingly cold, devoid of any master-disciple affection. No. It would have been far better if your hand had been severed at the gambling house, and you had died in the gutter. The sect leader looked down at him with profound disappointment. If that were true, at least the Manhwa sect might have averted utter ruin this time. Only now did Thun Tang truly comprehend the sheer, catastrophic gravity of the disaster he had wrought. The foes whom Thun Tang had so foolishly provoked were no mere debt collectors. The haunting silhouette of the young man with his business-like smile and his female assistant loomed in his mind like an inescapable nightmare. They were beings before whom even the great sect leader of Manhwa trembled in an absolute existence that must never, under any circumstance, be crossed. The elder's withered face contorted, drenched in cold sweat as the terror of the past washed over him. From this moment forth, Manhwa enters its highest state of alert. Evacuate all guests immediately, and let none enter or leave the mountain. Understood. Hundreds of disciples cried out in a deafening, earth-shaking unison, though their hearts faltered in confusion at this unprecedented emergency decree. The wind howled relentlessly as disciples dispersed into the shadows, utilizing their Lightfoot techniques to seal off the entire mountain under the shroud of night. Rear gate guards, in position. Northern slope trail, Sia. Below them, Thuntain lay flattened like a crushed insect, his face swollen and bruised, drowning in bitter regret. Broad gate, all swordsmen deployed. Clutching his bleeding nose, Thuntain squeezed one eye shut, his breath ragged with terror at the grim fate that awaited them. Wait. How had things come to such a desperate pass? Bian Tom stood in silent dismay, gazing down at the broken culprit at his feet, his heart heavy with dread. Pray. Pray that they truly perished beneath your pathetic swordplay. You had best pray with everything you possess. The sect leader warned, his voice cutting like ice. A disciple puffed his cheeks, channeling his full strength to blow the alarm horn, its resounding wail piercing the gloomy night air. The horn's echo reverberated through every valley and crag of the mountain, buzzing all. Patrolling disciples drew their swords, bracing themselves for battle. The sect leader stiffened in dread, a bead of cold sweat trickling down his temple as a dark, ominous premonition seized his heart. Report from the front gate. 2 suspicious figures are ascending the mountain trail. A frantic shout shattered the stifling silence. Prostrate on the cold ground, Thuntain's eyes whitened in sheer terror, his heart hammering against his ribs as if it might burst from his chest. Suspicious figures. And there are 2 of them. Could it truly be? High above, a perfect, luminous full moon hummed suspended in the sky as pink plum blossoms drifted down like tears, heralding the arrival of an impending storm. Beneath the canopy of blooming plum blossoms, 2 familiar figures ascended the mountain path, their steps leisurely and entirely unbothered. Jet black boots tread firmly upon the fallen paddles, pacing forward without a trace of haste or hesitation. With a subtle, knowing smile, the young man walked beside the enchanting Laho. Unscathed and entirely whole after the explosion, the 2 marched boldly into the domain of Mount Hua to collect their dead. The manager closed his eyes, savoring the cool night breeze as it blew past. Standing beside him, Laho gazed up at the towering peak, her eyes resolute and solemn. From the grand gates, the 2 sentries cried out in sheer panic as the silhouettes drew near halt. Sweat pouring down his brow, the disciple strained to bellow with forced bravado by order of the sect leader. The Mount Hua sect is currently close to visitors. Seeing the 2 continue their leisurely advance, the guard trembled as he demanded, state your names, your sects, and your purpose here. Met with this resistance, he merely wore an enigmatic, professional smile, utterly devoid of fear or hesitation. Pink plum blossoms drifted to the earth, weaving a suffocating silence before the impending storm. A pitch-black boot stepped heavily onto the earth, crushing a plum blossom petal in unspoken declaration of absolute dominance. I am Manager Kim of the Continental Bank. I have come to collect the debt signed in the name of the Mount Hua sect. In Huayan County at the foot of the mountain, the Huayan Inn lay in ruins after a terrifying explosion, as townsfolk gathered to whisper in agitation. Plumes of thick smoke and dust rose from shattered timber and collapsed walls. One townsman gasped in shock, what in heaven's name is this? Filled with dread, the crowd murmured about the source of the earth-shattering blast. One trembled, asking if it was a cannon strike, only to be dismissed by his neighbor, don't speak such nonsense. Amidst the rubble of bricks, stone, and splintered wood, grim white smoke drifted. A fearful voice speculated, it must be an invasion by the barbarians. Beneath the pile of collapsed beams and stone, a shadow stirred slightly, signaling that someone had survived. Deep within the wreckage, a low groan of pain echoed. Ulho's crimson lips parted slightly, as cold sweat beaded on her brow from the agony. Furrowing her brow, she struggled to open her wide, round eyes amidst the choking dust, letting out a weak whimper as waves of pain coursed through her body. Regaining her senses, she realized the chief was shielding her completely with his broad back, bearing the crushing weight of a massive roof beam. Beholding his stalwart back bracing against the immense weight, she cried out in shocked concern, Manager Kim, are you alright? Despite the colossal pressure bearing down upon him, his expression remained perfectly serene as he looked down and asked gently, are you hurt? Alarmed, the assistant gasped, I am fine, but what about you, chief? He replied softly, then that is a relief. Both remained unscathed, protected by the defensive internal energy of Thuntain. I am sorry, chief. It is all because of me. The chief smiled, placing a reassuring hand over his chest, leaving her dazed as he said, do not worry about it. Protecting our assets is merely a basic rule. It would be a grave loss indeed if Lady MacLeod were to be injured. You do realize that you, too, are an asset of the Continental Bank, do you not, Lady MacLeod blushed furiously, her eyes wide as she stared at the chief, utterly speechless at his double-edged words. He gently took her hand, pulling her to her feet as they prepared to set off for the debt collection. Let us go. It is time to work, he said, and she gave a quiet nod of assent. Beneath the falling plum blossoms in the dead of night, the 2 strolled leisurely toward the grand gates of the Mount Hua sect, where 2 disciples stood in solemn vigilance. The guarding disciple swallowed hard, his throat tightening with tension. To the mainland banking house. He surely must have said the mainland banking house, right? Suddenly, the sect's massive gates slowly creaked open, cutting through the sheer bewilderment of the two gatekeepers. It was the elder of the Mount Hua sect, Hu. Elder. Elder Hu, head of the Hall of Discipline, descended the stone steps with slow, deliberate strides toward the two uninvited guests. Stopping before him, Hu clasped his hands and bowed, offering a deeply respectful and solemn greeting. Are you distinguished guests from the mainland banking house? I am Hu of the Mount Hua sect. The two gatekeepers stared in absolute disbelief, unable to comprehend why their notoriously strict martial uncle would humble himself to bow before a complete stranger. Even Laho was momentarily taken aback by the elder's reverent, almost fearful reception. Astounded, no one present could believe their eyes. A heavy silence draped over the mountain as the chilling truth loomed on the horizon. Beneath the moonlight and the swirling plum blossoms, the fearsome elder of discipline stood with his head bowed to a mere debt collector. Manager Kim flashed a polished, is-this-like smile. I am Treasurer Kim of the mainland banking house. To receive such a warm welcome despite our unannounced arrival is indeed my utmost honor. Sect leader Hein Tong closed his eyes and replied with calm composure, please, do not pay it any mind. He offered a polite explanation for this as the very first time Mount Hua has had the honor of hosting esteemed guests from the mainland banking house. Manager Kim's eyes flickered slightly upon hearing those words. The sect leader continued, we are merely observing proper etiquette. Exhaling a puff of white smoke, a subtle, knowing smile played at the corner of Manager Kim's lips. He immediately clasped his hands and returned the bow with a radiant smile. As expected of the Mount Hua sect, renowned for having the grandest magnanimity in all of the Jianhu. To show such profound respect to a mere loan shark upon our very first meeting, you truly deserve your reputation as pillars of the martial world. The elder remained silent, his razor-sharp gaze dissecting every movement and nuance of the man before him. In his mind, a harrowing memory from 30 years ago resurfaced. A single man from the mainland banking house had set foot on Mount Hua, shaking the sect to its very foundations. If he truly hailed from the mainland banking house, the elder analyzed silently, he should have questioned my claim that this was their first visit. Yet the man before him had brazenly accepted the statement, without a second thought. Staring intently, a firm conviction locked in his mind: he is an impostor. Gritting his teeth in silent fury, he had never imagined anyone would have the audacity to impersonate the mainland banking house to humiliate the Mount Hua sect. He turned, his robes billowing gently in the wind as he prepared to lead the way into the hall. A murderous smile played on his lips. Keeping guests standing outside the gates was indeed poor manners. Let us step inside to speak. He calculated silently he would not act rashly, and Tang had already been reckless enough. As shall make him pay dearly later. The grand halls of the Mount Hua sect lay shrouded in the silent night, cast in the dim, gloomy glow of pale yellow lanterns. The sect leader paced with hurried, anxious strides, consumed by an overwhelming dread. He muttered unconsciously like a man who had lost his soul. The Continental Silver Manor. The Continental Silver Manor. Beads of cold sweat drenched his face, as he asked himself in sheer terror, had the Continental Silver Manor truly re-emerged in the Jianhu? 30 years ago, the Continental Silver Manor had vanished without a trace following a bloody battle that left behind a sea of corpses. Since then, they had never been seen anywhere in the Jianhu, without so much as a whisper of a rumor. Drenched in a cold sweat, Pai and Tom wondered in bewilderment, why had they suddenly emerged once more? Why did this terrifying power choose to re-emerge at the exact moment a foolish disciple of Mount Hua ran up such an astronomical debt? The sect leader's footsteps faltered as he felt an invisible, suffocating pressure drawing near. Standing frozen in the center of the vast courtyard, he wondered, could all of this truly be a mere coincidence? Or was it some dark conspiracy? The sound of steady, rhythmic footsteps echoing nearby sent a jolt of sheer terror through him. Beneath the pale moonlight, a figure stepped leisurely through the grand gates, each rhythmic footstep hammering relentlessly against the sect leader's mind. Side by side with Laho, he walked with absolute composure, his bearing so confident and haughty it was as though he were merely strolling through his own private gardens. The sect leader's eyes widened in sheer astonishment, cold sweat drenching his brow, as he stood face to face with the two legendary creditors. Beholding the manager's handsome, scholarly face, the sect leader could not help but think that the man was far younger than he had ever imagined. He was entirely unlike the figures of the Continental Silver Manor whom Hein Tong remembered, leaving him deeply suspicious and bewildered. Staring intently, he wondered if this youth was indeed their disciple, or merely an audacious impostor playing a dangerous game. Yet, he cautioned himself against rushing to judgment. A single misstep here could bring about the utter annihilation of his entire sect. Manager Kim spoke. Greetings. I am Manager Kim of the Continental Silver Manor. An Hein Tong, sect leader of Mount Hua. I have already heard the entire story from my disciple. Bring him in. Two disciples hurriedly dragged forward the battered, broken figure of Tang, his hair disheveled and wild, bringing him before the assembly. With his face battered, swollen, and bloody, Tang trembled, not daring to lift his head in his sheer terror. The chief flashed a business-like smile to greet his dear customer, sending a violent shudder through Tang as he recognized the voice of his creditor. Trembling violently, Cold sweat poured down Them Tang's battered face. He could not believe his eyes. His creditor stood there completely unharmed. How could this be? Had the man survived a direct strike from the plum blossom sword art? What do you think you are doing? Apologize to them this instant. He raised his swollen face, staring in utter disbelief at his master's command. The culprit bit his lip, sweat dripping in the tense and humiliating silence. Staggering forward, he collapsed to his knees upon the cold ground before his two creditors. Leisurely clasping his hands behind his back, the chief looked down at the debtor with a mocking sneer. Ah, it is quite all right. After all, the knees of our esteemed customer are hardly worth that much anyway. An apology was only proper, so why? The manager's lips curled into a cold smirk, his gaze as sharp as a blade, because what we are here to collect is certainly not an apology. The remark made the eye of the Shuan sect leader twitch with rising fury. Furthermore, we do not grant discounts simply because you have apologized. Unable to contain his boiling rage, the sect leader roared to his disciples, arrogant brat. Sever his meridians and shatter his dantian this instant. Yes, those were mere thoughts he dared not utter. Closing his eyes tightly, he desperately suppressed his exploding wrath to avoid ruining their grand plans. The sect leader cleared his throat softly, regaining his dignified demeanor as leader. In that case, shall we step inside to converse? He declined instantly with a bright yet resolute smile. There is no need to delay. Let us settle this account right here. Assistant Lalhodi gently nudged the frame of her spectacles, her gaze turning incredibly sharp and professional. She swiftly opened the ledger and lifted her wooden abacus, poised to calculate. Her slender fingers flicked rapidly across the beads, producing a continuous, crisp clicking sound. In a clear, resounding voice, she announced the first loan, sending a shudder through them Tang behind them. The principal is 500 taels of silver. Ulho read out the interest portion in a loud voice, and the interest is 1,000 taels of silver. The Manhwa disciple standing nearby watched in utter shock at the mounting tension. Trembling, the culprit tightly gripped his purple cloud jade pendant. With a rapid click-clack of her abacus, Ulho read aloud with poise. The principal is 1,000 taels, interest is 2,000 taels, plus late payment fees and hazard pay. Her slender finger tapped down with decisive force, sealing the final figure. Looking her opponent dead in the eye, she declared, the total comes to 21,000 taels of silver. Dunk Tang's eyes bulged in shock, heavy beads of sweat pouring down his face, utterly unable to believe this astronomical sum. The disciples beside him stammered in sheer astonishment upon hearing the number 21,000 taels of silver. Gritting his teeth in helpless rage, Dunk Tang muttered bitter curses under his breath. He roared in indignant fury. What kind of extortionate interest is that? Even the principal is far higher than what I actually borrowed. The sect leader fell silent before coldly commanding, bring the money here. A gasp of disbelief rippled through the onlookers. 21,000 taels was an unimaginably colossal fortune to the Taoists of Manhwa, who had long held poverty and righteous austerity as their highest virtues. Yet, the sect leader secretly deemed them fortunate if this matter could be resolved quietly for this price. It would be a massive bargain for the sect. He reminded himself that whether the person before him was genuine or an impostor, Manhwa had to avoid deeper entanglements with the Continental Bank at all costs. Just as the sect leader was on the verge of compromising, the youth suddenly spoke up. Wait. Wearing a knowing smile, the youth reminded him, you have missed the most crucial part. Fine Tom's face paled in shock. What? His business-like smile turned razor sharp as he uttered the words, the price of lie. He declared in a ringing voice, the compensation for Manhwa's attempted murder of the shall be 10,000 taels of gold. The entire temple courtyard plunged into a deathly silence at this outrageous demand. It was gold, not silver, exactly 10,000 taels of pure gold. 10,000 taels of gold far exceeded the sect's annual budget. Ian Tong stood frozen, crushed under the invisible pressure radiating from the creditor. Ian Tong swallowed hard, his face darkening with tension as he realized his opponent had no intention of backing down. So, he wants to fight. With the situation hanging by a single thread, the leader was forced to make an immediate decision. Should he completely empty the sect's treasury? Or, as memories of the horrific fire that once engulfed Manhwa flashed before his eyes, another option loomed, or should he make an enemy of the Continental Bank? Elder Hyan Hu suddenly approached and spoke in a hushed voice, startling the sect leader. Leaning close, Hyan Hu delivered a grave whisper, just moments ago, at the mountain gate. The elder recalled his brief exchange with the gatekeeping disciple regarding the true identities of their two guests. Xuan Zong's eyes widened in sheer astonishment upon hearing the secret intelligence. He stammered in utter disbelief. What? You mean they are fakes? Xuan Jun nodded in grim affirmation, insisting it was a gamble worth taking, for the sect could never bear the burden of such a staggering sum. Xuan Zong fell into a silent calculation, beads of sweat rolling down his brow, betraying the fierce conflict raging within his mind. Closing his eyes tight, he steeled his resolve to embark on this life or death gamble to safeguard their treasury. The sect leader snapped his eyes open, and barked an order that resonated across the temple courtyard: deploy the plum blossom sword formation. Instantly, the disciples drew their swords in unison, their razor-sharp blades gleaming coldly beneath the moonlight. The drawing of dozens of blades unleashed a metallic ring of unsheathed steel, thick with murderous intent. The disciples glided swiftly across the brick courtyard, seizing key tactical positions. The formation enveloped them in layer upon suffocating layer, sealing off every avenue of escape for the two guests. A pale pink haze of true peace surged furiously from the lead disciple, projecting illusions of falling plum blossoms charged with immense power. Li Hua's expression faltered slightly, her emerald eyes widening with apprehension at the overwhelming majesty of the ancient formation. She gasped in sudden realization, spotting a startling anomaly: the red threads on their sword hilts. Are they all red plum sword masters? The plum blossom sword formation. The sect leader watched the formation take shape in tense silence, his brow furrowed with anxiety. What a pity. If only the white plum sword masters dispatched to the Martial Arts Alliance were present here. The plum blossom sword masters, the elite vanguard and mightiest force of the Manhwa sect. They were divided into three ranks: azure, red, and white. Among them, the white plum sword masters were the select few who had attained the pinnacle of martial mastery. With all of the white plum sword masters currently away at the Martial Arts Alliance, Taoist Master Xuanzong found himself in an utterly desperate impasse. A tempest of crimson sword ki swirled violently, threatening to devour the enemies trapped at its center. Ah. If that is the case. At this rate, things are going to get a little more costly. Even the heavenly demon Wichichian had to yield and retreat before the absolute majesty of this formation. Let us see how long you can maintain that arrogance of yours. In unison, the sword masters unleashed their assault, tearing the very air asunder. The plum blossom sword array. First form a single point of plum blossom. Manager Kim maintained his enigmatic, professional smile, showing not the slightest intention of dodging. The collision of forces unleashed a blinding explosion of pure energy in the center of the temple courtyard. With a mere flick of his wrist, he effortlessly neutralized the impact and deflected the devastating force back upon his opponents. Groaning in agony, the swordsmen were hurled into the air, their weapons slipping from their grasps. The array shattered completely, leaving the disciples strewn across the ground, utterly helpless before the overwhelming might of their creditor. The agonizing coughs and splatters of fresh blood filled the sect leader with sheer horror. He had truly shot himself in the foot this time. Sect leader Hian Tong's eyes widened, his jaw slack in speechless shock. He could not believe the sight before his eyes. The impossible. Designed to counter peerless grandmasters like the heavenly demon, the proudest sword formation of the Manhwa sect was actually. He is the truly terrifying one. The imposing figure of the big boss loomed like a dark mountain, casting a shadow over the hall, radiating an eerie, suffocating aura of crimson death. That man known as Manager Kim. He was the true demon. Struggling to rise, Hian Tong roared to the disciples strewn across the courtyard, "Get up and reform the formation, now." He bellowed in a frenzy, veins bulging on his face and neck, pinning his last sliver of hope on this life or death struggle. Give it everything you have. If we let him leave this place alive, Manhwa will have no future left. A faint, knowing business smile curled the protagonist's lips. His breath drifted out like white mist in the winter night, utterly poised and unbothered by their desperate resistance. He spoke in a calm, tranquil voice. "My dear clients, from this moment on, I will be charging a premium service fee.